All right. Well, I think we will get going. I think we have most everybody who RSVP'd on the call already. So that's awesome. Thank you, everybody, for being on time. We appreciate it. If this is your first Stellar Salon, these are really meant to be very conversational. Scarlett said I didn't prepare a big speech. That's okay. We're not going to have a big speech and a presentation. I will give a nice intro to Scarlett, and I'd love to have Scarlett, talk about her work and Oregon Shakespeare Festival, just so we're all on the same page. But I'll introduce myself first. I'm Will. I'm one of the founders of Stellar and the video geek and other things here. So I don't know if I've met anybody on the call. But I know everybody has chatted with us at some point or another. So I won't go too much into what Stellar is. I assume everybody kind of knows what Stellar is at this point. We have a lot of familiar faces. I know there's a bunch of folks who have used Stellar in the past to stream shows. I know there's a few folks who have not yet and are maybe interested or thinking about it or trying to develop a strategy. So that's great. Scarlett has been a great partner of Stellar and has done some really incredible work on our platform this year. I don't know if everybody has been able to see it. I've got a couple clips that we'll get to, but I have a little blurb about Scarlett here, so I'll read that and then we can kind of dive into this. So Scarlett Kim is a diasporic Korean director, artist, producer who creates overwhelmingly unclassifiable transmedia experiences all over the world, including contexts including and beyond theater, visual art, XR, VR, film. I don't know, maybe you have other things too in there. And I think that's a pretty good description. I'm going to show you one of the current projects OSF has up on right now, Cymbeline, which is definitely, I would say, unclassifiable. Previously, she was artistic director of the Mortuary, a performance laboratory hosting projects spanning Korean shaman rituals, chamber orchestras, and experimental LARPs. She holds an MFA in directing from Cal Arts and a BA in theater and performance studies and visual arts from the University of Chicago. At Culture Hub, a global art and technology community, Scarlett oversaw the artistic programming of the LA studio, and I believe you've been LA based for a while, previous to your voyage up to Ashland, which we'll get to. And today she's the associate artistic director and the director of innovation and strategy at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. That is not a title you hear a lot in theater and the arts, which is one of the main reasons we want to have her on, to learn about what that means and what the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is really thinking about when it comes to innovation and strategy. So anything else I missed there, Scarlett? Anything you wanted to add about your background? Okay. I pulled some numbers earlier this week. Oregon Shakespeare Festival live streamed had 6.4 months of video watched on Stellar this year by all of their customers. That's all paid tickets. So if you took every minute that everybody watched and put it end to end, it would last for 6.5 months. That's pretty cool. And that doesn't include some of the other kind of interesting things. They did a number of in-person pop-ups and had a whole VR theater festival in New York and a bunch of different things. I have a couple clips of some of her work and Oregon Shakespeare Festival's work that I wanted to play for everybody. And the first I'm going to start out with is some classic Shakespeare from the Elizabethan style theater there in Ashland. They did an event for The Tempest in their theater on film series. And so I'm going to play that. It's going to take about 45 seconds.
Well, by the Larkins, I can go no further, sir. My old bones ache. Here's a maze trod indeed through forthrights and meanders, but By your patience, sir, I needs must rest me.
O Lord, I cannot blame thee, who am myself attached with weariness to the dulling of my spirit. Sit down and rest. Even here, I will put off my hopes and hold it no longer for my flatterer. He is drowned, and thus restraint of fine, and the sea mocks our frustrate search on land. Well, let him go.
I just chose that clip because I thought it showed the production just super well. It was great. It was in front of a live audience. It was handheld cameras and super high quality, and it was one of my favorite things I've seen on Stellar this year. And I got one more clip to kind of just you guys have to see the whole kind of gambit of everything that Scarlett and OSF are doing. So this is, I think, like the other end of, it's still Shakespeare, but you're going to see it's very a very interesting, I think, and different take on it that I've never seen before, at least.
Oh, dissembling courtesy. How fine this tyrant can tickle where she wounds. My dearest husband, I something fear my father's wrath, but nothing always reserves my holy duty what his rage can do on me. You must be gone, and I shall here abide the hourly shot of angry eyes, not comforted to live, but that there is this jewel in the world that I may see again.
My queen.
So yeah, just incredible range of things this year. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Scarlett, what can you tell us about those two productions and all the other things you've done this year?
Thank you for the stellar introduction. I've been waiting to make this pun joke this whole time. I'm Scarlett. Thank you for the intro, Will. I use she, her pronouns. As Will said, I serve as Associate Artistic Director and Director of Innovation and Strategy at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I'm part of a shared leadership team of 3 Associate Artistic Directors, each overseeing innovation and strategy, new work, and artistic programming, all here to support and actualize our artistic director, Nataki Garrett's vision for the future of theater. So a lot of what I do as the Director of Innovation and Strategy is to explore and celebrate and bring forward the intersection between live performance and immersive technologies. And that has meant film, VR, AR, XR, immersive and interactive work, podcast, and other bespoke and new forms of all kinds. So Will showed 2 clips from 2 of our major projects this year. One is a series called Theater on Film, which we launched in 2022. It is a series of special watch parties that feature cinematic captures of our repertory productions. So the one you saw, which was a clip from Tempest, was at our outdoor 1,200-seat Elizabethan theater, which is our kind of iconic Shakespearean theater, where we do all kinds of stuff ranging from Tempest, which you saw, to a punk rock new musical called Revenge Song, which was in rep this season. So the Tempest production, I think, was a 9-camera film shoot that took place over the course of 3 days or so with a full film crew. So it's really, the Theater on Film program is all about actually finding new intersection between theater and film, film as a medium in and of itself. So we had really fantastic directors of photography, colorists, film sound engineers, and so on, a full film team working with our theatrical production team to make this, bring this to life. The Cymbeline Project is a 10-episode unclassifiable transmedia series that has been in development since 2020. It is it's actually a fun fact is that it, I think, has more Shakespearean text than any of our in-person productions. So it's actually very grounded in Shakespearean text and storytelling and characters. Each episode, it's broken up into 10 episodes, and each episode is kind of a unique medium. So you saw an episode, which is episode 1, which was all about kind of hand-drawn visual text in this 2D generated environment. There was also an episode that was entirely stop motion puppetry. There was an episode that was shot in 360 video outside. There was an episode that was a choose your own adventure interactive game where you, for each of the scenes, you choose how should Caius Lucius respond, and that kind of leads you on a unique journey in this interactive fiction platform that we coded from scratch. So the Cymbeline project really embodies how we actually think about this intersection between theater and immersive media at large. It's kind of a smorgasbord of artists from all kinds of disciplines and backgrounds, not just theater. So puppet artists, visual artists, musicians, filmmakers. We were really intentional about curating an expansive playground for artists and creative technologists who may not usually be in the same space to come together and make this together. It is also, I think, a exciting proposal into this idea of to do Shakespeare is to do it anew. We talk about that all the time at OSF of approaching Shakespeare as a new play process. And the Cymbeline project is very much following that North Star. So that's some about the two projects that you shared, Will. I think it's been really exciting working with Stellar on all of these projects, including Theater on Film, including the Cymbeline project, but also on various other projects like Quills Fest, which was our VR festival. And the fun thing about Quills Fest is that there's so many ways to engage in it. You can, if you have a VR setup at home, you can use your VR headset to enter into it. You can also view it and walk around in the immersive space that we created on your web browser. You could also visit us in an in-person pop-up, which we had in Brooklyn in New York for the launch weekend. So it was really interesting working with Will to figure out how do we really celebrate the fact that Quills Fest is a project that is intentionally about multiple entry points and intentionally about demystifying VR being inaccessible and techie and scary. So we did a lot of work there in collaboration to really kind of make that access point more intuitive and more accessible. What are some other projects that we worked on, Will? I feel like there's so many. There's also kind of standalone projects like Dr. G's Bingo Extravaganza, which was a 1-day, 2-day event on our campus where this performance collective, For You Collective, created a performance for Dr. G, who is a civil rights activist and a local hero. And we also made a web art piece that was a fan club dedicated to celebrating Dr. G. So that was an interesting use case of partnering with Stellar to, again, kind of invite folks to engage with this very interdisciplinary project in the way that they want to.
Right. I think one of the other things I would add is accessibility is super important to OSF. And so through all of these, one of the big topics is how can we make everything accessible, closed captioning. I specifically chose the ASL version of Cymbeline. You guys do ASL on almost everything. So yeah, I think that's a lot. I think OSF might use the most combination of different things, selling in-person tickets and streaming tickets and tickets to websites and tickets to VR apps and tickets to every combination of possible things that we can think of. So that's been one of the really exciting things we've done this year together. So we haven't had any questions so far, and we're 15 minutes in. Jim, who's not here, is gonna scold me that I didn't call on people enough. Louisa Lyons is on the Salon today. Louisa, I know you've joined other salons in the past, so I'm gonna call on you because I know that you're gonna ask a great question. You know, have you number one, did you have a chance to check out any of OSF's content on the platform, and what did you think about it? And maybe give a brief introduction if anybody doesn't know film live musicals.
Sure. Thanks so much, Will. Hi, all. I'm Louisa, use she, her pronouns. I am the creator of Filmed Live Musicals, which is a website that aims to catalog stage musicals that have been filmed and made available to the public. It is available at filmedlivemusicals.com. I started watching OSF stuff last year with Manhattan, the play, which was devastating. And I loved Revenge Song. Oh my God, I loved it so much. It was so fantastic. And I've seen clips of Cymbeline, and I really want to check it out. But I do have a question. It's actually not directly related to what OSF is doing, but I'm wondering, Scarlett, because you're from Korea, do you have an understanding of the scene in Korea with streaming theater? I know that they're streaming a lot of musicals on TV and online, and I'm curious just what you think of the state of things.
Yeah, so my primary work before joining OSF was working with a art and tech lab called Culture Hub, which was based in Korea, New York, LA, Indonesia, and in Italy. So it's a kind of brainchild of MaMa Experimental Theater Club in New York and Seoul Arts, which is an interdisciplinary university, arts university in Korea. So actually, a lot of what we did was create new software-based open source solutions to telematic performances, like multi-locational performers performing together. I think there's a unmuted iPhone joiner, but I think we're good. And also really different ways of thinking about streaming to make it more accessible and more embedded part of how we experience performing arts. So I think in Korea, I mean, my perspective is a little bit bifurcated in a way, because there's obviously a huge bustling musical theater scene and the K-pop scene and kind of that side of things. And there's also actually a really exciting, more experimental performing arts international community of practitioners. So a lot of what we did at Culture Hub was actually thinking about bridging some of the kind of more pop and mainstream cultural practices with some of the more experimental practitioners. So I feel like I'm trying to think back to your question, which was about how does streaming and all of that happen in Korea. I think Korea is such a tech forward country in its culture and society. So there's a lot of excitement to kind of R&D and prototype new ways of doing anything really tech related. So it was working with between US and Korea co-productions. There was a lot of Korea has all of this infrastructure and the fastest internet ever. What does it mean to actually, collaborate, do these transnational collaborations with different internet conditions or different approaches to, streaming?
Great. Greg, yeah, jump in.
I have a question. I don't know if it's a good question, but it's a question. I'm from Gingold Theatrical Group in New York City. We're an off-Broadway theater company in our 17th year. We're using Stellar in the spring to do a video on demand, run a week of our production in Canada that we just finished. My question really to you, Scarlett, is how are you all, what you're doing at first is avant-garde and entre nous and exciting and all those things. What kind of team do you guys have to deal with the unions to figure out how to get this all done?
Great question. Very one of the hot topics here at OSF for sure. We have a unique agreement with many unions, IATSE, Equity, SAG, etc., because of the bespoke nature of the repertory theater. But there's a lot of similarities that we share, challenges that we share with other theaters about, for example, using the COVID clause in the equity agreement as a way to stream theater, but what will happen in the future What is the relationship that equity and SAG will draw between each other, and how will that affect how we think about streaming? But for the most part, we're using that COVID clause or the archival clause in the equity agreement, and we have a unique individual agreement with our designers, so we have to actually approach that slightly differently than other theaters. But and Cymbeline project was a SAG project, which meant that we signed on with SAG through a separate entity. So we've been kind of experimenting. A lot of these projects are really about artistic experimentation, but also how does it actually force our business operations to have to innovate and have to respond and be adaptable. So that is actually a big part of my job, is contracting, is payroll for these crazy projects and all of that. So it's very much, sometimes it feels like we have a startup inside of a 87-year-old theater, and it's really interesting. And I think actually the most fulfilling part of my position at OSF is figuring out how we are repping with our repertory in-person productions. But sometimes, like the Cymbeline project was kind of a intentionally siloed production so that we can figure out what it means to do a film with SAG. But I think the union question is an ongoing, like I keep having conversations with other theaters who are experiencing the same questions, challenges. So I hope that this is something that I keep thinking that maybe there's a cohort or a kind of think tank where we can kind of work through these questions together. So that's kind of an ongoing question from my end.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's we're using that COVID arch agreement kind of put together, and it's just the fact that equity still calls it a COVID agreement makes me think, that doesn't feel like it's long for this world. They're gonna what it. I just find that to be we're a smaller company. I'm the managing producer. The artistic director David is here with me, and we're kind of a small operation. Just the logistics of that becomes so overwhelming 10 minutes into sitting down to put your brain on it, just because there's no rule of thumb yet, which I'm happy to be in the front of the process or wherever we're going. I just wondered if what you're saying really hit me in the chest, that if there was some kind of group where we could share our experiences, or some kind of national, this is what worked for us, this is what worked for us kind of thing, that would be so useful.
I can say, as somebody who's worked with people all across the industry, this is a conversation with everyone, so it's definitely not a unique problem to any one org out there. So great. Can you talk a bit more about what your technology and innovation team looks like, Scarlett, and how has it changed, I guess, from when you first joined? I think you've been at OSF for a couple years now. So how has things changed, and where are you guys going with your team? What are new capabilities that you're hoping to build over the next year?
Great question, because I just spruced up our org chart today, so I'm very prepared to answer this question. So it's interesting because we've intentionally created this shared leadership model, or Nataki has sculpted this shared leadership model, which is so much about how artistic programming, which is about overseeing our repertory productions, new work, which is a radical expansion of previously the literary department in thinking about new work expansively beyond playwrights and scripts, and innovation and strategy, which is of course a totally new digital and strategic department. So in our departments, a lot of our people are also dual reports and kind of touching multiple areas of our shared work. So my team has a couple of producers shared with new work, with artistic programming. So a producer who is leading the Theater on Film initiative is also working on the repertory side at the same time, splitting her time. It's not even splitting her time because it's so intertwined. So it kind of serves as a bridge or a liaison between the repertory and between the innovation and strategy work. Same with production management. My production manager, who I primarily work with, is also inside of the repertory conversations. So there's a lot of fluidity there. I think something that has been really important is to be, in a way, intentional and compact with our in-house capacity so that we can maximize how we work with external partners and creative technologists. So for Quills Fest, which was our VR festival, we invited these two incredible creative technologists and VR artists to serve as a year-long creative technologists in residence. So I am really excited about the creative technologists in residence program because it positions technologists as artists, which I think is always something that I'm excited about and pushing for inside of artistic spaces, as opposed to technical service providers. So they're coming in with a wealth of knowledge about game engines and creating immersive digital environments and all of this stuff, very specific expertise, but also they're kind of thought partners and have been really thought leaders in the VR space. So we're able to kind of collaborate on a very logistical and technical level, but also Ilya and Cyril have been instrumental in thinking about strategic expansion of our department. So I think that program is a good example of us intentionally kind of assembling a rotating community of creative technologists and partners in our midst so that we have access to different kinds of expertise. We have access to different kinds of workflow. We're working on a big game project, AR game project this year what I'm finding really fascinating is how game designers prototype and playtest is actually so resonant and similar to how we rehearse in the theater world. So I think there's a lot of synergy there. And also we're learning a lot about, we're thinking of this first part of what we're doing as a vertical slice, which means it's a minimum viable playable version of the bigger thing. So it's like thinking about it in that way unlocks all kinds of ways of looking at the material in a creative and new way. So we're very focused on actually fluidity and rotating partners outside of our core team.
Very cool. Speaking a lot of technology language there, and not necessarily things you typically think about in the theater, I think. So very, very interesting. How about some other folks? Does anybody else have a question they have for Scarlett? Yeah, Christina, why don't you give us a little introduction too?
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Christina Lundy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the artistic director of New York Shakespeare Exchange. I've served as the associate artistic director for about 8 years, from 2011 to 2019, and then was promoted to co-AD, and now shifting into primary AD as our founding AD is stepping into a more advisory and collaborative role. And we're actually in something of a hiatus restructuring period. And Scarlett, it's really exciting to hear you talk about the way that the shared associate AD role works at OSF, because that's actually a model that I've been thinking a lot about going forward for our company. I'm curious with regards to film projects. Our company has had a couple of film projects that are legacy projects with us, primarily the Sonnet project, which we started in 2013 and is still ongoing because we also have expanded it since then. But that was conceived as an anthology film project, making short films of each of the sonnets in a full catalog. And the original version of that project is within the 5 boroughs of New York. Each sonnet has a different location, but we then also launched a US version and an international version. So it's all kind of going, but those are filmmaker generated projects that they're filmed and they're finished projects. We also have a newer project called the Voices Project that is a performer generated videos centering around them talking about the personal resonances of Shakespeare's text for them as individuals and citizens. But again, they're filmed projects and then they're put on our platforms and they're viewed, but those do not include the level of direct engagement with audiences that you get with live events. And I'm curious with what you guys have done at OSF, if you can speak to any projects. It sounds very much like the VR Fest had a lot of this, but even maybe the Cymbeline project to some degree, it doesn't seem as if theater on film is as much about direct engagement in real time with the audiences, but I'm curious to hear your experiences of challenges of finding those engagement points and maybe triumphs or happy surprises of finding those engagement points.
Thank you, Christina, for your question and for sharing about all of what you were exploring and going through. I think the word live has become really, what does live mean? Like we constantly talk about that now, because does it mean real time, like real time-ness, or does it mean shared experience? Does it mean like physical reality? And we've found that like people have all kinds of their own subjective definitions and assumptions about live. So it's been really interesting. Kind of our ethos has been how can we offer the most different ways of engaging for a single kind of source material or content. So for theater on film, last year, we primarily showed it as watch parties. Like you could only watch it in a shared, like at this specific time, you come, and we hired watch party hosts, which were usually actors or directors or designers of that show, to be like, hello, I am here in the studio. Like I'm gonna chat like during the thing, and the stellar chat function and the emoji function was really helpful in facilitating that. And then at the end, having a Q&A. We tried a couple of stretches of on demand as a secondary thing. So this year we're actually planning on expanding the on-demand access to it so that people can come to the live shared experience and on demand, because we're just seeing that there's yearning for both. And we're like, there's actually no benefit to like being essentialist about choosing one or the other. Like, I feel like there's the ecstasy of being in the watch party and you get to like have a special, intimate access to the artist. But a lot that just confines the viewership to that one moment or two moments. So I think I'm very excited about having it available on demand. On the other hand, Cymbeline is entirely on demand, and there's people watching it in their own time. And we've been really trying to emphasize in all of our marketing copy and everything about like, cook your dinner while watching Cymbeline. It's really about watch it on your phone as you go to school. So it's really about asynchronous, invite it into your life rather than like having to like put on a suit and come to the theater, which is something that we're actively trying to interrogate at OSF.
It was also released at stages, I'll point out.
Yes, and also we experimented with a drip release schedule of releasing a few episodes a week for a few weeks to see how that would do, which was a huge experiment, which, learned a lot. And at the same time, there's a lot of requests for like, oh, I really want to like binge watch it with friends, or high school groups being like, can we like have access to this content so I can show it to my classroom? So we're kind of learning a lot really from feedback, and really the bottom line is like, oh, there's usually there's only benefits to offering different ways of access, and really thinking about it that way. I also think having in-person touch points to digital work has been really a focus. Like next year, we're planning on having this, we keep calling it Cyberland because we're doing Rent in the repertory, and there's Cyberland, like that is a plot point of Rent. So we're like, we're going to call our digital studio Cyberland. Anyway, the Cyberland Expo, where people can come and watch Cymbeline, watch theater on film, watch, like just be able to like hang out in this micro amusement park and have in-person relationships guided with docents to digital work, which I think is also important because I think it can feel inaccessible or really far away for some who don't have a relationship to technology if you just like are supposed to access it from home.
Thank you. That was really far-reaching. I appreciate the spectrum of things you described there.
Great. I think Michael was next. Oh, you're muted.
All right, there we go.
There.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Michael. I work here at 54 Below in New York City. But I've started researching and creating mixed reality performances ever since like undergrad. So, and back then it was it was less welcoming. Like at least the public was less welcoming for, you know, something unclassifiable, right? It was, especially in my program, my theater program was very traditional. But throughout the years, as like, you know, my career has progressed, it seemed like people have opened up. So my main question, I guess, is like, you know, in your experience, like, how have you encountered any pushback at all from producers, investors, or even creative teams that, let's say, like you that you have at hand, or like even creative teams that like are explaining their own, like, you know, visions, like of what they think of, like what they're going to do? Because I assume, at least in my experience, when grabbing hiring you know, people that are in tech to become artists, it's sometimes those, like what we think in theater and how they think do not necessarily align. So there's that friction. So like, how have you navigated through pushback of those different sorts, you know, from the financial standpoint and the creative standpoint?
Yeah, great question. I always think about how theater has actually, the theater field has actually always been an innovation leader in many ways. Like when video and projection design came into theater, everyone was like, what is this? But then now, like, we don't have any shows in our season without video design. Like that has become a really important part of how we think about theater. I always think about how I think of Shakespeare as a collage artist and as a populist artist who was really interested in engaging the most cutting edge creative technology of his time. And that's really how I like Cymbeline, that was really important to think about these assumptions or dominant culture ideas we have about Shakespeare is actually just often rooted in white supremacy, or often rooted in making theater elitist and inaccessible. So actually to do Shakespeare is to break it apart and to be a collage artist like he was, which is what I believe. So I feel like, you know, there's a lot of, excitement and also resistance. And I feel very honored and blessed to be in a position where I'm pushing forward Nataki Garrett's vision, which is all about theater and tech, both spaces that disinvite, both spaces that put up walls to marginalized voices. We actually have an opportunity at that intersection to create a radically accessible and inclusive space. So really, in every innovation effort we do, it is centered around equity, it's centered around diversity, it's centered around the idea that actually difference is not a hurdle or an obstacle. Difference is actually an asset. And we're actually able to have perhaps solutions to the sustainability question of theater through these innovation efforts that we're doing. Like, you know, OSF is traditionally a destination theater, meaning that people travel to Southern Oregon to come see a few plays, and they have this beautiful wine country experience. And there's so many things that are constantly destabilizing that idea. Like this August, we had smoke. So it's like, we have to shut down shows. COVID, right? Like the fact that the idea of traveling to Ashland implies a certain level of economic privilege. You can't just like, not everyone can just travel to Ashland and have this festival experience. So it's actually like, how can we acknowledge that and acknowledge about a lot of power and inequity that goes into what makes theater inaccessible, and actually think about expanding the idea of destination. So it's not just about coming to Ashland. Destination is also your home as a cultural space. Sarah Ellis, who has the same title as me at RSC, who is a pioneer, started this work like 10 years ago. She talks about home as a cultural space, and it's really inspiring to me because we think of cultural spaces as something that's designated, that is, you know, put on a pedestal that you go to and you have to observe certain manners. But how can we radically kind of expand that idea? And I think there's a lot of resistance out of, I sometimes think about fear of obsolescence, of like theater. What if theater as we know it becomes obsolete? And to that, I'm kind of like, I also love in-person theater. I am also a director. I just directed a play with like no XR in LA. So I sometimes do that too still. So it's like, I think it's important, or it has been important to think about all of this work, not in competition with the liveness 1.0, but it's actually just a different way of making art. It's just another way of having access to the transformational power of art. So I think sometimes I think dominant culture ideas make us feel like we can only center one thing, like we can only have one way of doing theater, but it's like actually there's multiple ways, and actually maybe that'll help us sustain the theater industry.
Love it. Oleda, did I pronounce that right? I think you were next.
Thank you, Alina.
Alina, sorry. Yes.
My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm on Whidbey Island, the ancestral home of the Coast Salish peoples. That's up in Washington State, just north of Seattle. I've spent a lot of time in Ashland. I went to SOU. I worked at OSF for several years before returning to Whidbey. I'm the executive artistic director of Island Shakespeare Festival, and have held essentially that position. They put the executive at the beginning of it more recently, but artistic director through COVID for sure. And I'm really curious about your how you've prioritized audience, like marketing to different audiences. And I was on house staff at OSF, so I'm aware of the demographics of the traditional OSF audience from 10 years ago, and the resistance of that audience even to like scanning tickets versus like looking at their paper ticket. So I'm really curious how how audience retention has been with these projects, or if you're specifically targeting new audiences, and then if you see those new audience members become in-person audience members too, or if it's really two separate things. And then with that, kind of the cost analysis of, I mean, OSF has a very different budget than my small company. But I'm curious, we've had a really hard time getting people to pay for digital content. I think because there's so much digital content that's free and accessible, and people were binging everything through the pandemic. And so it was really hard for us to get folks to even donate. And we're also a pay what you will festival. So even the idea of setting a ticket price was really challenging for us to kind of wrap our brains around. We're kind of getting over that, finding ways to maintain accessibility while also being more financially sustainable. But I think those are all kind of related questions, and sorry to pile them on there, but.
No, thank you for the
question.
question. Like, I feel like we could probably we all could like spend like hours and hours and hours talking about this. Maybe this is a sidebar. I would love to continue this conversation, because that is one of the big challenges, right? Of OSF has a unique challenge in that it's a destination theater. So when we talk with our kind of colleagues in theaters who are in a city, it's a very different conversation also. I will say, it is very much about, the digital strategy is very much about new audience development. It is not trying to, in a binary way, isolate the old guard, quote unquote, but it is also not trying to invest tremendous energy and resources in convincing people that this work is valuable. Right. So it's been actually more about finding partners and funders and allies in other industries. Like when we did our, for Quills Fest this year, we had 3 projects that were led by iconic Tony Award winning, theater artists. Those projects in the motion capture were sponsored by a motion capture studio. And if someone, had that idea a few years ago of like, who like a motion capture studio as OSF's partner and in financially supporting this project, that's kind of a really unexpected or like, unexpected partnership, unexpected pairing. But there was great synergy there because we were able to move towards the same goal across industries. So those are the conversations in terms of how we resource this work and how we're approaching fundraising, really thinking about how do we build strategic partnerships with partners in the tech world or in other corporate or commercial spaces that OSF is not usually, or OSF has not traditionally had partnerships with. How do we approach foundations in new and different ways? Like this is, whether it's like Symboling Project, which is kind of its own thing, or whether it's projects that incorporate new aspects into the our repertory shows. Also, how do we think about that as a research process? Like a lot of what we're doing is like well, if we ever figure out the NFT project, which is one of our new projects, NFT, how to do NFTs at a nonprofit performing arts company, I would love to be able to share that resource to the rest of the industry, right? So because it's so much of what we're doing is like, how do we make smart contracts? Like, how does a nonprofit organization hold a cryptocurrency wallet? Like, I truly like learning so much. So really thinking about it as kind of open source, like we have to, OSF has been kind of this innovation leader in a couple different ways, in different areas. So it's like, how can we do that? I think in the marketing end, yeah, it's interesting because it's, first of all, like you said, really hard to put money amounts to like ticket price. Like for Quills Fest, we're like, well, like we can look at comps like Tribeca Immersive and Sundance New Frontier, which is not the same thing, but like look at that, which is one thing. We can look at like tech conferences, which is like hundreds of dollars for ticket. We could look at like, and then like you said, there's so much digital content out there that's totally free. So we had to really think about a different way of financial forecasting. So that's very much what we're going through and thinking about. Are we actually, is our goal here like ticket revenue? And usually it hasn't been, like ticket revenue usually hasn't been one of the goals of our digital projects. Is it about the most amount of eyeballs? Like, is it about getting strategic partners in there so that we can kind of like use it as a pitch deck to build new relationships? You know, I feel like there's many different ways of thinking about it, which has been, it is a challenge because even just saying, oh, ticket revenue is not how we're thinking about resourcing this work can be an unacceptable or a, you know, idea to some. So it's like, how do we actually really challenge ourselves to think innovatively? And a lot of our systems, like box office is a good example, is based on in-person, like selling tickets to butts and seats in Southern Oregon. So I think a lot of conversations that Stellar and I've been having is like, we need to really think about every step of the audience experience from buying the ticket, because we cannot take anything for granted. There is no like default behavior. We can't assume anything. We have to really think about it. But let's continue this conversation for sure.
Yeah, I think you had so many good points in there, and it's definitely something that we at Stellar have been thinking about for a long time. What is, you know, you mentioned earlier, what does live even mean? And it means different things to different people, and you know, different people have different ideas of price anchoring of what they're willing to pay for digital versus what they're willing to pay for a butt in a seat in Southern Oregon, as you put it. So really, I think everybody is no one has the answer yet. I don't think, you know, there's definitely no consensus anywhere, but all really interesting things for the future of theater and live entertainment, really more broadly. So Marissa from Broadway at a very prolific Stellar organizer. I think you guys stream like once a month from the Bourbon Room in LA, and I think you've even done some other events beyond that. And you had your hand up, but you took it down. I wanted to make sure that we got you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, Scarlett. And well, it's nice to meet everybody. Yeah, I am Marissa Matthews, she, her pronouns. I'm the producing artistic director of Broadway at which is currently happening at the Bourbon Room. I'm sort of rebranding it so that it can go anywhere. So Bourbon Room is just the space in which we're doing it right now. We just launched this show a year ago, and so we're this like baby seedling. My show is different in that it is showcasing Broadway, film, TV, and like comedians in the Los Angeles area. It's sort of filled the space that was the community that we were lacking out here, and just sort of a space where we communally could come together and celebrate and sort of connect sort of all the from talent to executives and theaters. I collaborate with a lot of the theaters out here, so I'm doing a co-production with Pasadena next year, and it's just all snowballed into this really amazing thing. And like Will said, we stream every show, which has been amazing. We've gotten the quality to be really good. Your last answer was really valuable in just thinking as far as like partnerships and fundraisers and people that are allies to what we're doing. I'm specifically right now looking for really that exposure and that interest in, I feature really interesting people. So rather than like the show itself being the selling point, it sort of is like who is part of it. And so my question for you is like, do you do something like that where you're specializing in selling like the pieces inside of what you are doing? And if so, like what would those selling points and marketing be to a larger audience?
Yeah, we've actually been using a similar strategy to the one you just mentioned for projects like Cymbeline and Quills Fest, really almost presenting it to the public like it's like a profiling of a artist, exciting artistic voice rather than the project. And I think that's effective for a couple of reasons. One is because for Quills Fest projects, it's really an open-ended series of commission presentations. So it's like, I don't know what Tai Defoe will do, but we know that Tai Defoe is a super exciting artist and people are excited about what Tai Defoe will do in VR. So let's tell that story as opposed to, trying to kind of prescriptively decide what the project will be when it's in reality being developed. And a lot of our projects are kind of being developed and constantly iterating and constantly kind of morphing. And I think I'm kind of being intentional about how I use the word work in progress, because I feel like that means a very specific thing in the theater world, but actually all of our XR projects are in progress because there is some element that's constantly iterating. So I have found that strategy to be really compelling and exciting, to just really focus on, this is a place where we're inviting the most seminal, most bold, adventurous artists to experiment, and you get to hang out with them. In Quills Fest, all of our panels we called them studio visits instead of panels, so that it's more about studio visits. You get to like hang out with artists. You get to step into the atelier of the artist. I think also I'm realizing so much how much of the marketing muscle at OSF, and I think in other theaters too, is about selling the product, which maybe this is obvious, but I'm like, our whole thesis and experiment right now is actually by inviting strategic windows into the process, that is actually more effective. That is actually telling the story more authentically, and that is also more effective. But that is a muscle that we're very much building and really engaging with our artists directly to think about what that is. Like when the puppetry episode of Cymbeline, it's so fascinating, all the storyboards they used and all the ways they thought about transforming Shakespearean text to puppetry. It's like, that is a really cool story to tell, and it's also actually gives context to people to actually come into it. But these are very like in progress thoughts, because that is not that is kind of like really challenging our systems and our machine here at OSF to think outside of the box. So I feel very lucky that we have an artistic team that is like excited and eager to do that. I do think there's a lot of resistance across the field though, and I think that's something that we're constantly facing and working through.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think especially because like you're saying, you sort of have this notable space in which people trust your work. And so you bring somebody in. And so I think the other part or side of that question for me is, especially in being something so new, but bringing in notable people, how do I sell it to somebody outside of that person's exact orbit and audience, you know? But that's really helpful, and it's interesting. It's great to know that that sort of is like expanding, not just in like sort of a cabaret showcasing experience, but theater. So thank you. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think we're thinking a lot about process and presentation, like because of the work in progress thing I just said, but there isn't actually a lot of space, especially with the closure of many of our beloved developmental spaces in the theater world. Like, I think having a space where it's about theater artists being able to experiment without a predetermined outcome is really crucial. So we had a resident artist last year who directed a show in our repertory stage, comes from a theater directing background, but also made 2 short films and 2 VR pieces. So that is a kind of blueprint of the kind of artist supportive space that we strive to be more and more, of where we can host an artist to explore and engage in their artistry in expansive ways. And we're actually able to be like, oh, this idea is a film, great, like let's do that. Or this idea is actually an in-person performance, like we can also do that, and we can actually adapt and be an expansive space. Yeah, but we're going through our strategic planning process right now, and the key, like the most important key word is artist-centric. Like, how do we center the artist in everything we do? So that's been a kind of a guiding ethos for us.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And if you are back in Los Angeles, come check us out, girl.
Yes, I would love to. I'll be there soon in a few
Or
days.
live on Stellar.
Or live on Stellar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we are running out of time. I was going to try to keep this to 45 minutes, but you guys had great questions, and I think this has been a really interesting salon. And I hope we got to everybody. If anybody has another question or something and you'd like me to forward it to Scarlett, I'm happy to do that. If you want to send me an email, I'm will@stellartickets.com. But yeah, I want to thank Scarlett for her time today, and I look forward to working with OSF in the future. And if anybody else on the call would like to ask more questions or chat about Stellar or whatever, we're always around and happy to chat. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.